the Michigan Public Transit Association. Welcome, Clark. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. Delighted to join you today. Am I preloaded on the computer? Does anyone know? If not, I have a handy jump drive.
Scroll down. Does it scroll? Can you get the track?
We've got a technical helper. Where'd she go?
It doesn't look like I'm on here. I'm guessing.
Did she put it all into one PowerPoint?
It doesn't look that way.
You scroll down on her PowerPoint?
Yeah, I tried that, and it just goes to questions. Okay.
We've got a flash drive.
I came prepared. There's no problem. If I can just find it on here, amongst everything else. And they thought that I could never learn technology. So first of all, today I would like to introduce Dusty Fancher from Midwest Strategy Group. I think all of you probably know Dusty already. She is the expert lobbyist in Lansing on all things public transportation. And we're delighted that she works for us with her firm. So, whoops. MPTA currently represents over 60 transit providers across the state. On this map, you can see where they are located. This is both public transit agencies as well as the specialized service companies that Gene talked about. They utilize anything from cutaway vehicles, large buses, vans, and ferry service as well. As an example, in the upper right corner, In the upper right corner, you'll see a little boat out approximately on Drummond Island. So that's one of our ferry service operators. They actually operate three ferry boats, passenger ferry boats, in the eastern end of the Upper Peninsula. And then where you see a logo of like a wheelchair, that's a 5310 agency that belongs to the MPTA. We fluctuate. We're not the only state association. There are two in the state of Michigan. We're the oldest. We're the largest. Sometimes members do come and go, as with any organization. So I'd like to back up, if I could, to 2021 for you. That is the last year that we have statistics pre-pandemic, and I think given the uncertainty of the last couple of years, it's good to take a look at those numbers. We do provide in Michigan a level of public transportation in all 83 counties. I think that's a fact that sometimes is overlooked. Public transportation literally is everywhere in the state. I won't debate. We said 78, but I'll take Gene's word for it. There are 77.
Back in 21.
In 21, there were 78, exactly. That year, they transported 30 million passengers statewide. Examples of these systems would be SMART, who's here today, Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. In Grand Rapids, the Rapid, those are three of our larger agencies in the state. And then we have I think it's 40, close to 40 members of the association who are the more rural or non-urban agencies, similar to Otsego County Transit, where Representative Borton hails from. We have, or did in 2021, 89 various specialized services recipients and sub-recipients across the state. They transported over 608,000 additional passengers. And examples of those types of agencies could be your local area agency on aging. It could be a Goodwill agency that's providing trips. You referenced NOTA in Northern Oakland, Representative Steele, and that is one of our specialized service operators that belongs to the association. And then more recently, we had Western Oakland Transportation Authority, which is a specialized services operator very similar to NOTA over on the west side of Oakland County. They sprang up in areas where, frankly, SMART at that time did not go. And they filled a need for public transportation that otherwise was being unmet. Back on the marine programs, if I could for a moment, I mentioned that the Eastern Upper Peninsula system operates 3 ferry services. They also operate bus service in 2 counties in the eastern UP. They carried on the ferry services over 530,000 vehicles in 2021 and individual passengers over 838,000. The Charlevoix to Beaver Island ferry service carried 7,400 vehicles and just under 34,000 passengers. And the Mackinac Island to the mainland, as Gene said, they primarily are servicing at the non-peak times and servicing the needs of employees to the island. And in the off-season, it was 29,000 plus. And then the Ironton ferry service, many of you may say, where's that? Ironton is a small ferry boat operation that's up in Charlevoix County. It basically crosses the lake that otherwise people have to drive miles to get around. And they carried 72,000 plus vehicles and 138,000 passengers in 2021. So the pandemic affected public transit, as you can imagine, in a number of ways. Most importantly, we were deemed an essential service during the pandemic, but all of our agencies, or nearly all of our agencies, certainly had to adjust their types of service significantly. There was a special focus on curb to curb, or what commonly was referred to as dial-a-ride service, with a guaranteed ride home. Even large agencies, and I'll use SMART since they're here today, SMART even saw an uptick during the pandemic for their demand response or dial-a-ride type service, while line haul service fell off. Obviously, people were working from home. They weren't traveling to work and back as extensively during that time. Policies protecting our public transit employees were a great concern during the pandemic. Every agency put up barriers, invoked masking, made sure their employees were getting vaccines. We bought out all the sanitizer that we could find in the state, and ironically, most of our agencies were finding sanitizer in the dollar stores. We tried to get sanitizer in bulk through the state purchasing contract. They couldn't get it. So they were raiding the dollar stores and the small stores, which was great for the business for those businesses, obviously, in their communities. And a lot of agencies flat out suspended fares during the pandemic. And the major reason for that is that fares at most agencies are paid with cash, and drivers and employees, or citizens, I should say, did not want to be handling the cash at the height of the pandemic. So fares were suspended in many cases. So now ridership is recovering. I don't know how well you can see that graph, but I will point out a couple of highlights on it. This is the national U.S. public transit use by mode. The top line in orange is referring to buses. So you can see how back in, before the pandemic started, back in January of 2020, ridership was way up there on the left. And it literally crashed very rapidly, as so much of our societal activities did. And then, you know, it started to come back. By July, buses were coming back up again, and they trailed off a bit. Came up a little bit more by January 2021, took another little dive, and then have pretty much been climbing steadily until the Omicron variant hit in November 2021, and then there was another little dip, and now we're coming back up from that. Nationally, we're about at 60% of where we were prior to the pandemic. The middle line on there refers to all modes, and, oops, there we go. And the blue line across the bottom refers to commuter rail. We have no commuter rail in Michigan. We do have some Amtrak service, but it's not commuter rail. So the ridership basically reflected our socioeconomic issues of the day, and the fact that so many people were hybrid workers, many working from home. There were still people during the pandemic, obviously, that had to get to work and had no other alternatives, had to get to medical care with no other alternatives. And that's where we saw our public transit systems in Michigan really able to step up, utilizing their demand response type vehicles, the smaller buses, vans, and continue to get people where they needed to go. Where do we go now from here? I think Dwight from SMART will talk a little bit about this too in his presentation. But we're returning to an ideal, successful transit through building ridership and providing equity in the community. We've been looking at, during the pandemic, the redesign of a lot of routes. And a lot of agencies have continued to evolve in that fashion to assure that underserved areas are getting the appropriate services they need. We've been looking at issues such as housing, daycare, the role transit will play moving forward. Access, flexibility, those are the key for us. Solutions likely will include a lot of ride on demand. Microtransit, which is a term if you're not familiar with, you will hear more about that from Dwight. A lot of agencies have gone to transit apps on phones, obviously, because that is the method many people today utilize to schedule their transportation needs. And I think we'll continue to see increased paratransit services. Paratransit, again, being those important services that serve the underserved people of disability in particular. So I'd like to talk for a minute about funding. You heard from Gene on some of this. I'll just add that federal funding historically has been mainly restricted to capital needs. However, there are some federal grant funds today that can be utilized and flexed and used for operating purposes, which is a bit of a change from the historical situation. The great thing about transit money is that every dollar we can send to Washington as a match, and Gene reported already that MDOT has never been unable to meet a match for a program we've applied for, every dollar leverages $4 of federal money. So it's a great return of federal tax dollars. On the state funding side, we receive our funding from portions of the fuel tax. Obviously, that's a concern for us as it is for the road folks, some of whom are in the room today, because we know fuel tax is going to be diminishing return for all of us. Vehicle registration fees, we get a portion there. We're allowed to get a portion, and don't ask me to explain the formula because it was designed to be impossible to explain, I think. But it's a percentage of a percentage, and frankly, we don't get all the auto-related sales tax that we should going to the CTF, honestly, because we don't get any portion of the big box store sales of auto-related items. So if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you change your own oil and you do your own work on your car and you buy your merchandise in a big box store, it's not tracked by Treasury. We don't get a portion of that. We also occasionally have received dedicated general fund dollars, for which we're always grateful. Act 51 of 1951, as amended, is the guidance for all of our funding, as it is for road funding. Under local funding, we get a lot of that from locally passed millages. If not a millage, most local units of government dedicate some of their general fund dollars to transit. We also have a lot of contracts at the local level, contracts with various human service agencies that help us tremendously. And then, of course, we have fare box. Some agencies also utilize things like advertising on buses to bring in a little extra revenue. In speaking of millages, I do want to say that public transit millages across the state pass overwhelmingly. If we're second to anyone, it's only senior citizen millages. The people locally have just great support for their own transit agencies. And, you know, that's really important to sustaining us. A bit about the levels of funding. Local funding, on average, is going to come in at roughly 40 to 50% of an agency's funds. State funding, on average, about 30%. It's a little higher for rural, non-urban agencies, and it's typically a little lower for urban agencies. But on average, about 30%, and then federal funding makes up the balance. The years of the pandemic have probably skewed those numbers. I'm giving you the historic perspective on that, because there was so much federal money that was made available. So local funding is important because that's how the local folks can vote to put skin in the game. And local funding then can leverage, as was pointed out earlier, I think by Representative Steele, as an agency increases their local funding, it can draw the rest of the agencies down. The pie is finite. It's only so large, so anytime we recarve it in a different fashion, it makes the end game for agencies change a bit. But that local funding is a show of community support. The goal is to reduce the burden on the backs of those who need it most, and thus allowing for a lower fare. Generally, as I said, the higher the local support, the lower the fare, and the greater the support in the community. A little bit of bus operating history, eligible operating reimbursements, and it's not on the slide, but I'll preface the slide by telling you there are only 2 fiscal years in history when we came anywhere close to the statutory levels of 50% urban, 60% non-urban, coming from the state to local transit agencies. And those 2 years were 1997 and 1998. I won't go into the details and the political history of that whole story for you. If you want to know sometime, I'll be happy to meet with you. But those years were the years we got up in the 50%, 45 to 50% urban, and 55 to 60% on the rural side. And basically, ever since 1998, there's been a pretty steady march downward of state support. So if you look at in 2013, we were looking at an appropriation that held pretty steady for a number of years, right around 167 million for local bus operating, and that meant 31.4% urban support, 40.9% for rural. And I won't go through this whole chart. You have a copy of it. I think it's readable. Yes. So you can see for yourself, certain things happen. The advent of the RTA, the gas tax increase in 2017, the years of COVID. And please note, at the bottom, the numbers are for 2020 and 2021 have been reconciled by MDOT, which is an annual process that Gene's people go through. And for 2022, 23, those are budgeted numbers. For the first time in our history, and we're grateful for it, last year or this current fiscal year, we bumped up over 200 million in local bus operating support from the state. However, look what's happening to the percentages of support at the same time. 29.2 on urban, 34.5 on rural. So with that, I'll just talk for a moment about MPTA's budget requests. We are supporting raising local bus operating for 2023-24 by 20 million over the current level. The administration has asked for 15 million. We are asking for 5 million more than their request. And we have a long-term goal of reaching the full statutory ceiling of 50% urban, 60% rural state funding by fiscal year 2027. That's our targeted goal. So this would be a step. Last year was kind of a first step. This would be an additional step towards that goal. We support the bus capital investment line item as proposed by the administration. We support the governor's recommended increase in specialized services operations. They have not seen an increase in that line item in years, and I guess, Gene, you probably know what year that was, but it goes back a long time. Their costs are increasing too, just as all transit agencies. And then finally, we support the boilerplate language moving toward low-emission propulsion fuels. We do want all alternative fuels to be recognized as low-emission fuels, and there are several available to Michigan transit agencies. A lot of agencies utilize propane. A lot of agencies utilize CNG. A lot of agencies are moving to electric vehicles now, and we even have agencies in the state that are operating hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which often goes unnoted. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Director, for that presentation and your work in making sure that we are focusing and being intentional about the role of public transportation here in the state. Do members have any questions for the Director here? No? All right.